Right, ladies and gentlemen, let us commence. Are we okay recording? We're in, right,
Microphone,
okay.
please, Chair.
Thank you. Yes. On the wrong place. There we are. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We're there. Well, welcome to this evening's simultaneous meetings of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee for Resources and Overview and Scrutiny Committee for Services. My name is Councillor Peter Martin. I'm the chairman of the Resources Committee. To my right is Councillor Carol Coburn, who is the chairman of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee for Services. These simultaneous meetings are being held in the Council Chamber at the Bearers in Godalming and are being webcast live. Now, as this is a simultaneous meeting of both committees, there are certain aspects of the introduction that must be repeated. However, this will stop when we get to our substantive items. So it might be a good idea, certainly in the early stages, if people were to introduce themselves and say who they are when they speak and which committee they are. But before we go into full session, I will go around the whole room and to make sure that everybody knows who everybody is. And we have various officers with us, and it will be very good to welcome them. So I will start and we will go in that direction, if I may. So Peter Martin, I've already introduced myself. If we can go to Carol.
Carol Coburn, chairman of the O&S Services.
Philip Townsend, Vice Chair of the O&S Services.
Chris Harrod, Deputy Democratic Services and Scrutiny Manager.
Kimberly Sohn, Regulatory and Review Advisor and Clerk in the meeting.
Good evening, I'm Alexander Pollock. I'm the Assistant Director for Governance and Democracy.
Graham White, Farnham North West Ward.
Good evening, Councillor John Rabini, Hazelmere, County, Borough and Town Council.
Good evening, I'm Jackie Keane and I'm a councillor for Hazelmere West.
Good evening, Daniel Hussaini, councillor for Binscombe and Charterhouse Ward. Thank you.
Good evening, Councillor George Hess, Farnham Castle Ward.
Good evening, Alan Earmaker, Farnham Castle Ward as well.
Good evening, Laura Cavaliere, Whitley and Milford Councillor.
Evening, Dave Busby, Ward Member for Chillingfold.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, Councillor Paul Follows, Leader of the Council and Member for Godalming Central and Oxford.
Yes, Councillor David Beeman, I'm just observing, but from Farnham North West.
Evening, Zoe Barker-Lomax, Councillor for Hazelmere East.
Good evening, Michael Higgins, Councillor for Ewhurst and Ellens Green.
Good evening, Andy MacLeod, Councillor for Farnham Moor Park.
Good evening, George Murray, Councillor for the Bourne in Farnham.
Terry Weldon for Hazelmere East.
Councillor Jerome Davidson, Member for Hindhead, Hazelmere.
And we come back to Andrew. Andrew, do you want to just introduce yourself?
Andrew Lawton, Farnham Webburn and Vice Chair for O&S Resources.
Then if we could come to officers, please, if we could start in the front row with Luke.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, councillors. My name is Luke Harvey. I'm the Assistant Director for Strategy and Corporate Services. Thank you.
Good evening, Jenny Sturgis, the Senior Policy Officer.
Candice Keat, Head of Finance.
Ezra.
Good evening, councillors. I'm Ezra Wallace, Strategic Director for Economy, Planning and Place.
I'm Claire Upton-Brown, Assistant Director, Planning.
Evening all, Julian Hickson, Strategic Director, Housing, Communities and Environment.
Right, thank you very much indeed. I hope that's clear with introductions. So I am apparently the presiding chair. I don't think it makes much difference, but like having several judges at a court of law in The Hague, isn't it? But we will operate simultaneously. So I will open and say, Kim, are there any apologies for the resources meeting?
Thank you, Chair. We have apologies from Councillor Peter Nicholson and Jane Austen.
I might just say I had a call about 20 minutes ago to say that Jane Austen's father-in-law died literally about an hour ago, which is why she's not here tonight. So I'm sure we'll all send our sympathy to her and to her family. So, Carol?
Apologies for absence from O&S services, please.
Thank you. We have not received any apologies. However, we're wondering if we've missed Councillor Munro from the apologies as he's not here.
Declarations of interest. Are there any? I don't think that we've received any in advance. Kim, are there any declarations received otherwise?
No, Chair.
And from services, Kim?
No, Chair.
Questions from members of the public. Do we have any of those, Kim?
None received.
And any for services, Kim?
None received.
Questions from members, resources, Kim?
None received.
And services?
None received.
Fine. Well, let us move on then to the main item of our discussions for tonight, which is the corporate strategy delivery plan. Members will recall that last October at full council, we approved as a council the corporate strategy. This now is the delivery plan to deliver the strategy in as much as it can be delivered during the course of the next year. We have with us to speak Luke Harvey and Jenny Sturgis. I'm not sure which of you wants to go first, but by way of introduction, Luke, do you want to go first? If we could then, what I intend to do, we'll have an introduction from officers. We will then go to discussion and a member's input. And what I suggest that we do is we take each section of the delivery report. There are five, 6 sections. We take each of those in turn. But anyway, let's go to Luke for an introduction. Thank you, Luke.
Thank you, Chair. So firstly, I'd like to say thank you to members of both committees for facilitating our bringing of this item to you this evening in a simultaneous meeting of both committees. Given the cross-cutting nature of this document, we felt it was the most effective way by which members could scrutinise the draft plan before it goes forward to the executive. It also mirrors the approach that we took last year when the Council's corporate strategy was adopted. So the Council's corporate strategy for the period 2024 through to 28, or Building Opportunity, was adopted last year. The corporate strategy sets the Council's vision to make Waverley a thriving and inclusive place to live, work and do business. While the corporate strategy outlines our intended destination, it did not provide a detailed roadmap for how we would get there, and that's the role of the corporate delivery plan, which the committee is considering this evening. The delivery plan is a document that will update and renew every year, and it sets out the main activities and deliverables that the Council will be doing to help deliver our corporate strategy priorities. We've aimed to include the most significant activities and so haven't included everything that the Council does. The content of the delivery plan was developed by the executive and executive members with input from strategic and assistant directors, as well as teams from across the council. We also fed into the plan the engagement that we undertook with key council stakeholders before Christmas, as well as the views of residents from engagement that took place earlier in the year. So the delivery plan that's before you is in draft form. We're seeking your review and scrutiny of the document before its anticipated adoption by the executive in June. The document also will be designed in accordance with the corporate strategy. The version you've got is I guess, is quite rough around the edges in terms of presentation, but it will be designed in a similar way to which you're familiar of the corporate strategy itself. So, and that's it from me. So thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to make some introductory remarks. I'd be obviously very happy to answer any questions, as with Jenny, that the committee may have. And we also have a number of key officers with us this evening who may be able to pick up some answers too. However, if we don't have the detail to hand, we'll follow up with written responses. Thank you.
Thank you, Luke. Jenny, have you anything to add to that? Okay. What I suggested to members is that they might have liked to have downloaded the copy of the corporate strategy. It only amounted to a few pages because what we're really trying to do is to say, is the corporate strategy that is approved now being delivered? The two papers, of course, are very linked. So the first section that we need to consider is a more sustainable borough. I just wonder whether there's anybody who wants to open up remarks, questions or discussions on anything concerning the sustainable borough, which is page 11, 12, 13, and 14. Anybody want to kick off? Councillor Higgins.
Thank you, Chair. Got two questions, but I'll deal with them separately, if that's okay. In there's talk of installing EV chargers at commercial sites we lease, but there's no actual talk of additional EV chargers in our car parks, which was expressly stated in the corporate strategy. And I was just wondering why we aren't pursuing that within our car parks.
Thank you. I had a question on that. I'll put it in now, if I may. I just wonder where we are with EV charge points. The next year, it just says, yes, we're going to be putting more in. How many have we put in? How many do we expect to put in? What percentage of that will be next year? And what is the success of that? What's the usage? And what's the sort of cost versus benefit as we see it at the moment? I think a little more detail might be a good plan. Luke, is that something which you can take?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Higgins, for your question. Yeah, it's a good one. So installing EV chargers is a key priority to help decarbonise, and also it's a growing. I think I heard it described this morning as a modal shift in transport. So it's important that the council uses its car parks where we can to facilitate that. What we've put in the delivery plan, I guess, is the things that we know at the moment. I think one perhaps thing I should mention as well is that it's something of an evolving document. There are various. I'm aware of several plans that we're looking at. Sorry, there are several plans that we're looking at across council car park sites to install EV chargers. We were talking about one in Hazelmere earlier on this morning. So there are plans afoot. I don't have the detail to hand, but I'm very happy to follow up with the service and car parking team and come back with a written response if that's okay. Thank you.
Could you give us some detail on numbers as well and where we are, where we're going to? I think it would be very helpful as a part of the report, not just simply to say, yeah, we're going to do more, but how many more and where does it fit would be a good thought, I think. Thank you. Councillor Barker-Lomax.
Yeah, thank you. I just wondered along the same lines whether a lot of these KPIs should be more smart, measurable. There's a lot of words and no numbers, no real targets. Is that what we'd expect in this kind of document?
Thank you for the question. Well, yes, you're quite right. So what we're aiming to outline here is outcomes and how we'll get to those outcomes. What we will be doing as part of the council's regular performance monitoring is to link reporting against delivery plan progress to some quantifiable metrics. So where we've got something, for instance, like as you've just described with EV chargers, if we've got a target for a certain number, we should be able to report we've done X number. Likewise with a reduction in carbon emissions and things like that. So that will come forward as we report on progress to demonstrate how we've achieved that. We'll also note that we will be shortly kicking off a review of the council's KPIs and how we align reporting on delivery plan progress against the council's KPIs. The way that we tend to posit these two things is that KPIs give you a good indication of the regular corporate ones, give you an indication of organisational health. What we can have here in measuring milestones is have we done it and what's the impact been and how do we know we've achieved it? And that's what we'll be picking up as we report on progress.
So from the chair, if I may, and I'll come to two or three speakers here, from the chair, would it be possible to build in some of the numbers that we're talking about into this report in terms of where we've come from and where we're going to and how many we expect to see during the course of this year, rather than just simply say, yeah, we're going to put some more in? Would that be something which you could incorporate?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, where we're able to, certainly we will look at that. Yeah, Jenny and I will
Okay,
look at that.
if
Thank
you could take note of that then, Chris. So what I intend to do with Carol's blessing also is that we'll take a note of the observations that we have and place it into a resolution at the end. I'll request that we will have a resolution at the end to say the committee's resolve to ask the executive the following, or to observe the following questions or comments by the committee, and we'll build in a series of thoughts that we've got as we go along, which I think is probably the easiest way to try and give a recommendation rather than to have 16 different recommendations as we go through. Does that seem a good idea? Members of the committees? Okay, fine. Can we go to the right-hand side? I've got Councillor Rabini followed by Councillor Hosseini. Councillor Rabini.
Thank you, Chairman. I was at a town council meeting with various officers there, and during the discussions it came out that Lower Street in Hazelmere was one of the worst areas for pollution. Now that came as a bit of a surprise for me because I wasn't aware of that. I don't know where the lowest or the worst areas are. Have we got a map of all the low areas and perhaps some sort of plan as to where they're going? Because obviously for pollution, I'm very concerned if Lower Street is one of those big areas that the local council were not aware of it.
Daniel, is your question on the same general point, or are you going on to something different? Okay, I'll hold on that. Paul, you want to make a point?
Yeah, so there is a map of air quality zones that we use as a reference for this. There are two defined air quality management zones within Waverley. One is Central Farnham, which, as many of you will know, is subject to the Farnham Infrastructure Plan. And the second one is the corridor going through Central Godalming up through the Oxford Road into Eashing Lane through my ward, actually. There are other areas that are relatively high, but I would just state that's relatively high within Waverley, which is low in general, with the exception of those AQMA areas. There is a division of statutory responsibilities between the highways and us as regards to air quality as well, which makes this more complicated. But air quality is something that we want to take a little bit more seriously going forward, in line with some of the comments from the county recently too.
Sorry, Councillor Rubini. Well,
Councillor King will do.
I think we've got Councillor Hosseini first. So.
Just not reading it.
Thank you, Chairman. My question relates to the overall goal of being a carbon neutral council by 2030. I see a lot of positive steps here to achieving that, to go further towards achieving that goal. But I would like to see a measure of how far we are in terms of delivering that. Are we halfway towards that? Are we 20%? Is there anything solid we can say about where we are and where we plan to be year by year? Milestones that we hope to achieve each year towards 2030. Thank you.
Yes, could I just emphasise that as well? We are 6 years since we implemented a climate emergency. We've got 5 years before we are going to be a carbon neutral council. So where are we? And ought we not to build a little more detail into the delivery plan?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor, for your question. Yeah, it's so the council has a climate change, it's a carbon neutrality action plan, which sets out some key metrics around reporting on our progress. So our baseline year is 2015-16. We're currently in the process of reporting on the progress in the reductions. The latest data available, I think, is from 23-24, which our consultants are working on the latest data now. But the data that we have to hand shows that since the baseline year, 2015-16, the council's emissions, which is scope 1 through 3, has reduced by 41.4%. So the trajectory is at the moment is positive. There's lots of variables at play. There's often what's going on more broadly in, for instance, in the decarbonisation of the national grid will also have an effect on, or positive effect on, the council's emissions. We are in the process of scoping an update to our climate neutrality action plan refresh, and we're looking to engage members on that process too, and indeed regular reporting. So we'll pick that up as part of the delivery plan. But I think there's been some positive steps in the last few years. Thank you.
Could I, again, I know that we can't build in vast amounts of detail, but it is one of the most important objectives of this council. I just wonder whether within this delivery plan we should build in the information that you've just given us, which says where we are and where we expect to be. And I think it would add value to this delivery plan if we knew where we were, rather than just, oh yes, we're going to do a bit more during the course of the next year. I think that will be very sensible. Chris, I think are you getting those points as we speak? Okay. Jackie. Sorry, it's Andrew next. I'm very sorry. Andrew.
Thank you, Chairman. I can see as a reference with regards to a project to support schools with encouraging active travel, and there's a reference made to bike and scooter storage facilities. Surrey County Council is obviously heavily involved with the LC whips. Are you working hand in hand with Surrey County Council on these travel initiatives? Or can you give me some indication on what's happening with regards to the highway part as well as just the storage facilities? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor, for your question. Yes, the council is certainly for a district is quite unusual when we have an active travel officer who works closely with county officers, and both in terms of improving the existing local cycling network on bridleways, but also in enhancing in terms of footpaths, so widening and linking up networks too. So there's the formal highways piece where there's shared spaces with vehicles, but also off highway access routes. So there are a few schemes that we're working with county officers at the moment. I think members will be familiar. There's a in Godalming itself, there is one such area to link up two paths, which can really promote the use of cycling as a means of transportation. And also we're looking at some other sites in other parts of the borough where there are options there too. But yeah, the LC whip is really important for that. And as the Highways Authority is the county, but we're very keen to support them in rolling out those sorts of active travel schemes more widely. Thank you.
So Luke, you say that funding and resources will be needed. The county council is the source of that funding. Is that what you're expecting?
Thank you, Chair. There are various sources of funding available for such schemes, such as the Community Infrastructure Levy or Section 106. The County Council often does fund such schemes via their capital programme that they have, and the council will work with them. But there's various pots that's available. If members are agreeable, I'm happy to talk to our sustainability active travel officer and find out what the kind of the big ones are on the boil at the moment, and come back with a written response in terms of detail.
I think in general, if we could be a little more specific, just saying rather than, oh yeah, funding and resource, we'll have to look for that, but I mean, where from, what are you expecting to get, what's realistic? This is a plan for this year. So if we don't know where we're going to get some money from now, we're probably not going to get it, in which case it's a bit of an irrelevance. So yes, I mean, you say August 2025, it'll be done. So that's one ought to have a clearer idea now of where that funding is going to come from.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, good point, very well made. This particular initiative here in terms of supporting schools with active travel, that's in the council's agreed budget, and the air quality action plan is in there. So that's kind of, it's funded, as it were. Other schemes such as the enhancing existing bridleways and footpaths to facilitate transport, there are the ongoing schemes have allocated funding. What the council will often do is bid for funding from external parties where there's a clear business case and need. That could be the county council, or it could be other agencies that support that.
I think it would be nice if we could add a little of that in. It would be, I think, very beneficial. Jackie, Mrs. Keane.
Thank you, Chairman. It's just a query, really. I know that we do need EV chargers because obviously we're getting more and more on the streets. But do you actually talk to the town's councils, for instance, and tell them where you're planning to put these? I know that we've got two in the main car park in Hazelmere, but we do have quite a full car park most days of the week. So I'm just asking where you plan to put these EV chargers, and do you let the town and town councillors know?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your question. So the council will be can't put them on the highway because that would be a Surrey County Council responsibility as the Highways Authority. But yes, when we're putting chargers in our car parks, can certainly take the observation that we ought to let local stakeholders know, including the towns and parishes, but also local business improvement districts, because it's a key benefit for residents and visitors, and can also promote people to come. So it's good that people know that they're there. There are interactive maps online that point people in the direction of electric vehicle charging points. A lot of that data is open source, and local authorities do contribute to that as well. So you can easily find it in your sat nav or smartphone. Thank you.
Carol Coburn. Carol.
Yes, thank you. If I could just bring the subject round to biodiversity for a change. I just felt this was slightly weak on biodiversity as an item. I think, what we're saying is, we're doing various things and it's all going terribly well, but we all know that Surrey is one of the counties that has the lowest, or the highest impact, if you like, on biodiversity of all the development. And one of the problems we know is that with development comes sort of breaking up, fragmentation of the the landscape. So it says here that we're checking that biodiversity is improved. Have we actually got a database of species and what we're trying to achieve in this? Because if we don't have a database of what we've got, how are we ever going to know whether or not what we're doing is improving it? I'm very sceptical about the biodiversity net gain in building at the moment. I don't think it's actually achieving anything, but I think we as a borough could become very active, say working with Surrey. We mention it in the main document with the local nature recovery network. And it is this network we've got to recover. There's no point in having a nice area with 2 or 3 species if they can't migrate to another area. So, I do feel that perhaps the biodiversity bit is a little bit weak. So could you tell me what's been done on the database, what we're short of, where we're going, and timescales, please?
Luke?
Thank you, Chair, for your question. Yeah, it's a great question. So biodiversity is a particular passion of mine. So what we've been working on, and we'll be working with Parks and Countryside team, is to do that exact piece of habitat baselining, which really uses geospatial analysis and geospatial data to, in effect, take the land that the council owns and manages, and using Natural England methodology. So there's something Natural England maintain a list of all priority habitats. There's 7 or 8, and they're enshrined in legislation as being needing to be protected. So the council looks after numerous such sites, including particularly in this part of Surrey is Heathland, and we've been working quite closely with and will be working quite closely with the Surrey Wildlife Trust on the Heathlands Restoration and Connections project. But the key thing we need to do is to baseline and map where these all are, and then use our management of those spaces to improve, restore, and create where it's all possible. So there's good examples that's going on, not just in Surrey, but more generally, where local authorities, let's say, as part of planning policy, we might have a SANG, a suitable alternative natural green space, that could be former arable farmland, could be turned into a priority habitat through appropriate management and grazing, for instance, or cutting the grass at a particular point in time. So the Parks and Countryside team manage a lot of countryside in our neck of the woods. What we're really keen to do, as you've described, create that baseline, map that against our management plans, and then to be able to demonstrably show that there's been an improvement or new habitats created. But as members will be aware, it takes an awful long time for habitat to be restored and to get back into a good condition. So what we're also particularly keen in doing is protecting what we've already got. And that includes the habitats that I've described, but also others such as ancient and veteran trees too, which host hundreds literally of organisms that live on them, particularly oaks. So there's a lot around here. We have the data, we're working through it. Thank you.
If I could just come back too, because you touched on planning. The problem with planning, if we don't actually have policy, we can't enforce it. We can try to do our best, but it'll be thrown back at us if we're not consistent in our attitude to this. So I hope when we're looking further down with the engagement at last on the local plan, that we are actually going to drill down into more detail than just we've got 4 towns, whatever number of villages, and actually look at the biodiversity within each area, because it's very diverse. Just across, I can only speak for Farnham, where we've done a biodiversity action plan, but it is very different in different parts. And again, the fragmentation is really significant in certain parts. And when we're building in our new local plan, the one thing we've got to do is to restore those networks. Otherwise, all that work you do in our green spaces will be less. So, I just feel this is a little bit wishy-washy. Do you know what I mean? It's not fair a word. It's not quite precise enough to say that we are going to get this database, we are going to protect and enhance our biodiversity, we are going to make sure that developers work to our standards and, that sort of thing. I just feel it's a little bit weak in its phraseology. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, we take the point, and you're quite right when it comes to planning. Green infrastructure is incredibly important for species to navigate and to survive in increasing areas of pressure. I'm conscious that we do have colleagues from planning with us. I'm not sure if Claire or Ezra would like to add anything.
Yeah, I'm happy to add a bit. Obviously, as members, particularly those on the planning committee, will know that mandatory BNG has been in force since February last year, and therefore developers are required to deliver 10% plus uplift year on year, with legal agreements controlling that, monitoring that in perpetuity. So the in perpetuity period is 30 years. The responsibility for the nature recovery strategy obviously sits with the county, and they are due to publish that document in 2026, and that will, as you've described, Carol, tie into the local plan work, so that when we have that complete set of data across the whole of the county, because obviously habitats don't stop at administrative boundaries, we can actually then use that to provide a more focused approach. And as Luke set out, the parks team have already commissioned, and I think is about to start the baseline data on our own land. Planning and parks are working together to look at whether there are opportunities to actually look at how we might help deliver improvements in biodiversity on our own land to support development as well. And that's a project that we're doing jointly with Guildford. So we have got some good work that is up and running. I think biodiversity net gain is complex, and certainly the development industry is struggling with it a little bit, and some of the legislation and the strategy obviously hasn't quite aligned with the mandatory introduction of biodiversity net gain. But we do definitely have a clear plan of how we're going to work with our partners and how that will then inform the local plan.
I could just come back very briefly. I accept all of that. It's just that the biodiversity net gain per site is pointless, really. You know, yes, you can work out what's going to go from a building site and what you're going to put in to hopefully replace that, and you can get a figure because the tables are there and you can get your figure. But that's not the same as saying, well, in that building site we need that, and that's got to link with something else. And that's my issue with this, that it's, you know, a segmented approach to biodiversity is not going to work.
And I don't disagree with that, but as I was explaining, it became mandatory and in advance of the local nature recovery strategies being in place, and that will be the document that informs how we best deliver biodiversity net gain through development. So there's just a little bit of misalignment, I think, in the timing of that work. And that's nationally, that's not unique to Surrey.
I wonder again, Claire, whether it would be possible just to build a little more detail into the observations there, Luke. What you've given us is a little more explanation, and you can then say, that makes a little more sense. I hate to say it's a little bit vague. I realise you have to get a balance between the length of the document and what you're going to say and how much you put into it, but I think a little more would be very helpful there. Okay, thank you. Councillor Hess, the last question.
Thank you, Chair. On page 13, it says that options are identified for the future operational function of the Bourne Depot. I take it that's the Bourne Depot in Farnham. Be interesting to know what those options are, whether that could be clarified.
Luke? Yes.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor, for the question. The depot itself clearly has not been upgraded for some time, clearly as part of what we need to do to make sure we're fit for 2030. And the new contract renewal, etc., that comes up in 2027 for the waste and any new fleet is to make sure that we have a space that is capable of being zero carbon and coping with electric vehicles and possibly a new electric vehicle fleet. Currently, the depot isn't fit for that at the moment, and it's a very, very tight site. The depot in Farnham, it's a very small site. It takes up quite some logistics to get the vehicles in and out as it is, and there are different standards for EVs in terms of where they park. So we need to do an assessment at the moment of whether that's going to be fit for purpose, which we're planning to do over the next year. which is the one that's referred to in this policy for EV charging and for the future fleet requirements, and look at whether that's going to be possible or not, or to what extent it's going to be possible. That will then inform our fleet procurement and what types of fuel we move to, whether we go to a hybrid type of fuel arrangement with some EVs and some, say, hydrogenated, not hydrogen, whatever it's called, vegetable oil, HVO, the vegetable oil solution, in various aspects. But at the moment, we would like, obviously, most of our fleet in the fullness of time to be electric vehicles, and that's what we're aiming towards.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Higgins, and then finally Councillor Murray. Councillor Higgins.
Thank you, Chair. There's a proposal to carry out a feasibility study on low emission zones. It does state that members and other stakeholders will be consulted, but I was wondering whether I could receive reassurances that if there was ever a proposal to introduce a low emission zone, that it would come to one of the overview and scrutiny committees before going to council.
Paul, leader.
You can certainly have that assurance from me. The zone would also require consent of highways and numerous other stakeholders, but it would go both through full council, the full O&S process, and indeed a lot of other steps as well. So you can have my assurance very much so, Michael.
Okay, thank you. Councillor, who's next? Councillor Murray. Then I'm going to come to Councillor McLeod, and finally back to Jackie, and I think we'll then draw this section to a close, otherwise we'll never get through. Right, Councillor Murray.
Thank you, Chair. This is probably a question for the leader, actually. But I'm just wondering why Councillor Fairclough would be in charge of air quality and low emission zones and these things when he's not the portfolio. He's a portfolio holder for enforcement. I mean, he's got a lot of things. I'm looking at Tony, how many boxes he's got. He's got 12. And he's the highest one in there. I know Councillor Williams is not far behind on 10 because of Mandy and I have been counting them up. But it seems like he's got a lot to do, and I know how busy he is as deputy leader and also that. So I'm just wondering why he's now taken on the air quality and environment brief as well. That's the only thing I would say.
First of all, not all boxes are equal is the first thing I'd say, although I would also just speak up for Tony in that not only is he doing a great deal of things, he's asking me for more things. And also air quality. Indeed, air quality is a regulatory matter and sits within the regulatory part of his portfolio. Certain elements of it relate to, for example, the Carbon Neutrality Action Plan and elements of environment, but the actual legal aspects of air quality that sit with the Borough Council versus that of the County Council are actually regulatory remit and sat under Richard Homewood, which is why the appropriate portfolio holder is in fact Tony.
Thank you. Councillor MacLeod.
Thank you, Chair. As you said in your introduction, you advised the members of your committee to look back to the corporate strategy from last October document. And I did that actually, and also looked through the comments that the members had made to the executive and the executive response. And I noticed that actually one of my comments was that there should be more in about infrastructure. And the executive agreed, and they said they would put that into sections 2 and 4. In fact, there is a reference in 2 to CIL, making effective use of CIL, but it appears under section 1 actually, and it seems to me to be in the wrong place actually. The infrastructure, CIL in 106, it seems to be more to do with the prosperous borough, and that's where it's referred to in the actual strategy document itself. So it just seems to me that box is in the wrong place.
Thank you. And I was going to make the point that there is no time scale in that box at the bottom of page 13 over the page to 14. I just wondered whether we could have a comment on that. The SIL, the infrastructure, is it in the right place, and what's the time scale? Is that something for Claire?
So in terms of the review of the strategic infrastructure SIL spend, the intention is to bring a report that will go through exec and then to full council about how we prioritise infrastructure spend across the borough and ensure that the strategic infrastructure SIL spend mechanism is reviewed to ensure that SIL is committed to infrastructure projects.
There's
and
no
so-
timescale. in
Sorry, it will go to the September executive.
You put September into the plan. There. Okay. Andy, does that satisfy you, or do you still you haven't had an answer? Is this in the right
And
place?
that's the second point. It's a very simple point, actually, that the corporate strategy does refer to it in priority 2, not under priority 1. And that was what the executive said, and it specifically says under priority 2, that's where we will make more effective use of CIL. It's not referred to in priority 1 at all. Yet in the delivery plan, it's referred to under priority 1. So it is definitely in the wrong place.
Claire, do you want to have a look at that? It does seem a curious place that you've got the SIL action plan in biodiversity, in the biodiversity section.
We can have a look at that with Luke and Jenny.
Jackie, the last question.
Oh, yes, thank you. On page 18, I was reading about the.
We're not at page 18
okay,
yet. We're
okay.
we're only up to page. We're only going as far as page 14 at the moment.
Jackie can have the first one.
Any other closing thoughts? Officers, is there anything else that you want to, any observation that you want to make? Julian? No? Okay, okay. Fine, thank you. I think we've done that one then. Let's move on to the next section, which is a more prosperous borough, which starts on page 14 and goes through page 15. This is rather shorter. Who wants to lead off on that? Councillor Hess.
Well, my question really is about undertaking this initiative to develop a shared brand for Guildford and Waverley at this time, given that there's a local government reorganisation not very far down the road. Is it appropriate to be doing that at this time? That there's probably costs associated with doing that. I mean, how much money are we going to be spending on this? And then for the local government structure to be changed completely in the next couple of years, rendering that work redundant? Question.
I think that's a question which you could direct to the entire strategy that we've got here. But Paul, do you want to make a comment on that?
Well, I don't think you can attest to the entire strategy, but I actually agree with Councillor Hess on this point. Some of those elements were written prior to LGR coming to the points that we've got. I would consider refresh of the branding an unnecessary expense. Where we will likely stop, and I apologise to officers because this is not something I've discussed with you, I'm doing this from the floor, where we will have a joint template for reports. We will continue to use a relatively shared collateral for things like PowerPoint packs, but I'm not going to sit as comms portfolio holder and authorise a branding exercise for councils that won't be here for 2 years' time.
I do think I was going to bring this up at a later point, but I do think that's a valid point. I think we ought to have a recommendation from this committee that we would look to be efficient in the discharge of our duties in terms of delivering the corporate plan, taking account of the unitaries which are just down the road. And I think that applies particularly actually to the resilient and well-managed council section at the end, where we really need to 6 months' time be having a look again to see whether it's being properly incorporated. There's a lot of work which could be done, which would probably be not sensible to do. Ezra, do you want to comment on that, or do you want to comment on that as a general approach?
Thank you, Councillor. So I think that's very helpful for people on the committee, which we'll take on board. And as the leaders pointed out, the great deal of this was drafted well ahead of the kind of LGR process and where we're at the minute. And I won't make any more specific comment on that, but just taking a step back, I think from my point of view, the needs of our communities and our economy stays the same. That's not going to go anywhere. So we owe it to them to continue to fight for Waverley and continue to make sure our businesses get the best deal. So I'd be keen within the resources we've got to continue to do that. And of course, we need to be mindful of whatever comes next, but that wouldn't be a reason not to continue to stand up for our businesses and make sure they get the best deal. And I know that's not being suggested, but I think that's important going forward.
That's a standard answer, if I may say so, we'd expect you to give, but I think we would want you to be mindful of the fact that in 24 months this council will cease to exist. and therefore we want to make sure that everything that is done with that in mind, so that we're not doing things which are not going to be required. At the same time, of course, we've got our responsibility to our residents. Okay, Mrs. Keane. Oh, that's later. It comes later. Okay. Councillor Barker-Lomax and Busby.
So I was going to raise this later under the housing section. However, it applies specifically to LGR. So since we're discussing that now, I think we should be making a recommendation to the executive to conduct a merger readiness review.
Sorry, this is getting to the last section. I think we ought to leave that until the last section.
Okay.
Okay. Councillor Busby, and then I'll come to Councillor Higgins.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so on page 15, under Waverley's towns and villages are thriving. I do think it's a shame that there is nothing in there specifically relating to our rural villages. Does seem very focused on town centres and high streets. So I'm not quite sure what that might look like. Perhaps, but perhaps it can be looked at, even if it was just a commitment to seek to meet parish councils to discuss some of the issues facing more rural businesses like village stores, pharmacies that residents rely on.
Could I also add to that, that in the corporate plan, there was a section which said we want to devolve more local services to towns and parishes. So that was a specific item in the corporate plan. I don't see any reference to what might be devolved to towns and parishes in the delivery plan. Would you like to take that at the same time? Luke?
Thank you, Chair. I'm very happy to pick up the point around if we can add anything in there around supporting rural towns, rural villages. Very happy to do that. I would have to come back to you on an answer around onward devolution to towns and parishes, unless perhaps the leader would like to make a comment. Thank you.
We can make a comment in relation to unitaries, which I suspect is what we're going to make. But Paul?
First of all, I will absolutely do exactly what Councillor Busby has suggested, and I think those were very specifically good suggestions to add as well, and we'll do that. In regards to the devolution of services, myself and Mark Merriweather as portfolio holder for finance, the focus is likely to be on the transfer of assets to towns and parishes as the principal thing that we're going to invest our energy in as a result of the conversations in LGR. And part of that is at the specific request of town and parish clerks for quite a lot more land than was envisaged in the pre-LGR era. So whilst it would be my normal practice to be investigating services that could be devolved, I'm just letting everybody know that the energy and time will go into asset divestment rather than service. Okay.
I think that since the corporate plan, since we've got the corporate plan which says we're going to look at devolving local services, it might be sensible to add that into the delivery plan and relate it to the fact that unitaries are coming and that specific point is addressed. I think that's a pretty important point to be putting into the delivery plan, as far as I'm concerned, as if I declare an interest that I'm a town councillor. But I think it's an important point which is mentioned in the corporate plan, which is not specifically mentioned in the delivery plan. Okay, Councillor Higgins.
Thank you, Chair. Just following on from Councillor Busby, same area about towns and villages thriving. There's an action point: monitor health of the high streets, vacancy rates, monitor footfall data, and then it goes on to say how we're going to measure it essentially is reduce town centre vacancy rates and increase town centre footfall. I couldn't tie those together. Just simply monitoring footfall and vacancy rates isn't going to reduce the vacancy rates and increase footfall. So I was wondering whether either that needs to be amended or we need more detail in terms of what action will be taken to reduce that.
Thank you. Luke? Luke?
Very happy to, I think you're quite right. We can sharpen that observation up or the action up there. I know there's a number of specific initiatives the council can and is doing to support high streets. I'm very happy to add that detail in. I'll consult with the relevant assistant director to get that included. Thank you.
I'll come to Councillor Davidson, then I think finally Councillor MacLeod. Oh, sorry. Yes, we have got Councillor Davidson, then Councillor MacLeod. I think we probably then reach a natural point where we can move on. Councillor Davidson.
Thank you, Chair. looking at the training, it's more sort of reassurance in my mind, the level of skills and the types of skills which are being included in the training provided by the borough. The impression I have from looking at our website on training, it's more geared towards retail or for small businesses trying to start up, rather than skills like gas fitters, plumbers, builders, which we seem to be short of. And I'm wondering to what extent the council feels that, the borough feels that it is obliged to provide a wider range of skills which are very important to our economy.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. That's a very important point. We did debate Waverley Training Services at the Budget Full Council. It is on the agenda to come back. I can't remember which, is it to your scrutiny committee, Carol? It needs to come back. There is an action plan which has been developed, and I think that needs to be properly reviewed at the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. So I would like to see a mention of the fact that that will come to an Overview and Scrutiny Committee meeting in the near future. If that would be very helpful if that could be incorporated, please. Okay. And Councillor MacLeod, I think we can then okay, we'll move over to the other side. Okay, Councillor MacLeod first and then Councillor Hess.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm on infrastructure again, in this case in relation to the prosperous borough. The biggest infrastructure project going on in Waverley by quite some way is the farm infrastructure project. And I always like to give some credit to Jeremy Hunt for this. It goes back a long way, but he was our MP and he kicked the whole thing off. And it became very much a cross-council, cross-party project. And it's going on now. And it's a very important project for the prosperity of Farnham. It's to improve, the current phase is to improve Farnham town centre, make it a much more attractive area to do shopping in and for the residents. And Waverley has an important part to play in this. Obviously, Surrey is in the lead because in this particular stage, it's very much seen as a road and pavements project. But Waverley has an important part to play, and it's not mentioned at all in the infrastructure delivery plan, and it should be, actually, and Waverley should be seen to be taking a key role in it.
I think that's an important point. Can we add that, Luke? I think that's a yes, Andy.
Thank you. Yes, we'll pick that up. Thank you.
And finally, where are we?
Well, I think we should go to inclusive.
Yes, but I think Councillor Hess was next. Councillor Hess.
Well, there's reference here to Waverley Training Services, and I just want to hang something onto the back of that because Waverley Training Services are based at the Memorial Hall in Farnham. And I'd be interested to know what's going on with the Memorial Hall in Farnham, given that the Gostry Daycare Centre is, I believe, due to be, choose my words carefully, they are going to have to leave. As we all probably around the room know, they were originally promised a new centre in the Brightwells development, and that was cancelled out in favour of making space for Marks and Spencer's food, but they never came. But in the meantime, they got put into the Memorial Hall at huge expense, somewhere in the region of £3 million to this council. And now they're being turfed out. And I'm not sure to where. Now, this might be something to come back to at a future
I think
O&S.
that's something which should come to an O&S committee.
But I wanted to flag it up because it's happening at the moment and it's of concern to local people.
It's on the agenda, Carol says, so I think it will become, sorry, you will put it on, Carol. Okay.
Thank you.
I think we've got that, Paul. I don't think we need to come further on that. And last question. Councillor Barcalow.
Thank you. I note that there's funding for venue space and marketing of local job clubs in Cranley and Farnham. Can I ask why we're not adding Hazelmere to the list, please?
Luke.
Thank you for the question. I'm very happy to follow up on the detail of that, but perhaps the leaders indicating to speak to may well know that. Thank you.
That's because the places that have been given funding have job clubs in existence already. Hazelmere does not. I'm very, very happy to say that if they did have one or need help setting one up, Waverley can facilitate that. And if they were extant, they would easily get funding, I am quite sure. But the reason they haven't been allocated funding is because there isn't one in Hazelmere. It's not a Waverley entity. It's an outside body that's being supported by Waverley.
Thank you. I suggest you follow that up after the meeting. Thank you for that. Let's now move on to the next section on pages 16, 17, 18 and 19, which is a more inclusive borough. And now, Jackie, Mrs. Keane, you had a question on this.
Thank you. Yes, I did have a question on page 18, and it relates to the implement of the food service plan. And as part of this, officers from our regulatory service team will inspect 100% of food hygiene premises required by food standards. My question is really, have we got the staff and the resources to do this? Because this seems a very, very large sort of thing to take on.
Who's going to answer? Ezra?
Yeah, no, thank you, Councillor King, for your question. This is a really important point and something we're really ambitious on. So that's a target that we should have, and we've looked at that really carefully. So the answer to your question is yes, we've resourced up. We've created extra capacity in the teams. It's also been a benefit of calibration we've been able to unlock additional resource to invest that, and we're confident we can meet that target. And that's really important to all of our residents and communities, that we've got food businesses that we can enjoy eating out in and trust in.
Thank you.
Does that mean that going forward then that 100% all food premises will be inspected every year? Is that what this is saying?
It's saying it for this year. There's certain regulatory requirements around it. I wouldn't want to say afterwards, but I'd say yes, but happy to follow up if there's some nuance to that.
Why would we want to make sure that they're all done in this particular year, but we're not committing to do it in future years?
There's specific regulatory requirements on us in terms of the number to inspect. I haven't got that detail in front of me. Happy to respond in writing. That's not me ducking the question, but I don't want to give misinformation to the committee. What that is a target for next year, which is what this delivery plan is
In my
for.
ignorance, I thought that we always investigated all premises every year, but obviously I'm wrong. Jackie, you want to come back, and then we'll go to Daniel Hosseini.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It would be really helpful going forward if we could have kind of a breakdown of in what areas have been inspected at a certain time, because 100% is a huge undertaking. And, you know, I would like to see whereabouts the inspections you've managed to do, maybe every 6 months or something. It would be helpful for us to know that.
Maybe it's something we should put in the quarterly indicators, if it's not already there.
I've got you, Mr.
Okay, but that would be the answer, I think, to the question. I've got you out of order. It's Councillor Weldon next, then Councillor Murray, then Councillor Higgins, and then finally Councillor Hosseini. So Councillor Weldon.
I have a question which refers to the first two items in the section, one on physical and mental health, and the second one on celebrating our diverse communities. And the question is, how are we responding to the recent Supreme Court ruling on biological sex and the Equalities and Human Rights Commission response that toilets must be restricted to biological sex? The court judgment was narrow and very careful to stress that alongside protecting the rights of women, transgender people must also be protected, and they can only be legally discriminated against in circumstances where it is a proportionate means of achieving a legitimate aim. Now, there are a number of transgender groups and activists who claim that the ruling by the EHRC is not proportionate and legitimate in terms of a legitimate aim. There are court proceedings now being launched. The problem is that toilet discrimination does not appear to meet that test. If a transgender person used a toilet assigned to their chosen sex, Most people would not even be aware of it because you, generally speaking, will not know that somebody is transgender. On the other hand, if, for example, a transgender person attempted to use a facility of their biological sex, and a transgender man, possibly bearded then, and a lot of transgender men do deliberately choose to use beards, went into a woman's toilet, that would immediately cause an outcry. So it doesn't make a lot of sense. Now, I don't want to argue the case right now, but the point is there are court cases being launched.
Okay,
we need to be ready for that.
We could take a lot of the meeting on this subject, and it's of course the law is changing Leader, do you want to just comment on this?
Very, very quickly. We're expecting from the Department of Justice and MHCLG a guidance pack for local authorities as a result of the Supreme Court decision. So at the moment, I would say hold fire on any of the commentary on this, because we will, as we are bound by the Supreme Court's ruling, we will also be bound by a new set of local government guidance that will be issued relatively soon, I am told. I will update members when I've engaged with those two departments about when we're going to get that guidance. But to be quite honest, I would not advise a debate on something that is in flux beyond the Supreme Court decision itself.
I agree with that. I think it's a tough subject to put into this. It might be sensible that we incorporate the comment into the delivery plan, that we will look into recent court judgments and guidance from government on this question. That might be a sensible thing to put into the delivery plan. Luke, I would have thought. Let us go then to Councillor Murray.
And I think I might just be able to add to some information for Councillor Keane and for Ezra. On the corporate performance report, we have a report which says food businesses with a scores on the door of 3 and over. And it gives us a data point of what those scores are, 95% of things. And as a former hospitality and coffee shop owner in Farnham. So in the 5 years I was the owner of my shop, I had 4 inspections. So I thought the inspections were very efficient, and talking to other ones in Farnham, it's about that as well. So I don't think what Councillor Keane was saying was 100% is unachievable. I think they're probably, if they're doing something in the 90% of food businesses, I wouldn't be surprised. I don't think if you did that. So I think, in my experience, I think that's what we're doing. We could add that score to this report if that would help. If you're going to aim for that, you could put that on that quarterly performance report under food businesses. So we do some monitoring already. But I think, Jackie, it's pretty good.
So
really.
a little extra comment will be helpful.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Higgins.
Thank you, Chair. I was delighted to see that there's a proposal for handy person services to complete simple work to help improve the needs of residents. My recollection is that was a proposal by Councillor Nicholson, which was endorsed by the Resources Committee, and so it's great to see that, and I thank the executive and officers for putting that in particular the target, specific target of 700 completed jobs. But my point was actually just further down in terms of vulnerable residents and training of
which page are you on? Which section?
Page 19. So training by safeguarding coordinator to enable services across the council to better identify vulnerable residents. And then the next section, which is enable frontline officers to work in partnership to provide increased support for residents. And then how we're going to measure that, there's obviously training and coaching which will take place. And I would just like to highlight mental health first aid training. I think would be useful for especially those frontline staff to be able to handle that, and it's just a note really.
Okay, so Luke, can we take note of that and try and incorporate it if we can? I think that's a reasonable point. Councillor Hosseini.
My question is regarding on page 16 about the health inequalities. It says that social value will be calculated at the end of each year and reported back. How exactly is that recorded? And in terms of the outreach with the leisure centres, is there a way that we can communicate to, do the leisure centres record data on who is attending, what age ranges are attending, and what backgrounds of people that are attending, which could be useful to get that data. And I have an observation about gym membership. If you're from a family with poor backgrounds, you'd have to get individual gym memberships for each member of the family. If we could suggest during the outreach to do a package deal for families, which could help promote better health for our residents.
Right. Sure whether that was actually in the corporate plan to deliver, but Luke, do you want to comment on that, or anybody else? So Julia, you want to make a comment?
Thanks, Chair. Yes, one of the things it is in the leisure contract to do is to deliver certain social value activities, including mental health training. So we do calculate each year how many people from which backgrounds and what characteristics they have, age, etc., of various aspects of deprivation, who's taken up some of this training, and obviously that comes as part of the social value calculation that we then make in terms of financial aspects as part of the contract that we can hold the leisure services to account to. So that's measured, and the take-up of that is measured by group. So we do that. Leisure itself, not my bag, but certainly I'll certainly pass on the comments around membership.
Daniel, you okay? Okay, thank you. Councillor Barker-Lomax, and then finally Councillor Keane. Oh, and then we've got Councillor Hess, and I think we'll then draw it to a close.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask that the guidance be sent to the committee members, please, that was referred to earlier.
Okay. Okay, fine. Yes, that's very helpful. Thank you. Councillor Keane.
Thank you. Yes, I just wanted to talk about the handyman service, if that's on this part now. I'm really pleased to see this because I think it's a wonderful scheme, but I just wondered whether we have actually started having our residents use this scheme, or is it an aspiration? It says it's measuring the number of residents assisted by the service, 700 completed jobs. Is that part of our area as well, or is that just Guildford?
Luke?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor, for the question. Yeah, so the target will be in Waverley. Thank you.
And then I think finally Councillor Hess.
Thank you, Chair. Page 16, I was very pleased to see that reports of fly tipping and abandoned vehicles are being investigated, and removal and enforcement action taking place. But I'd just like, on the back of that, under the left-hand column where it says our borough is safe and clean, to just flag up to everybody, some will already know where I'm coming from, but I would assert that Biffa are failing to clean our towns. Farnham is filthy. I came back from the West Country a couple of weeks ago, and I can tell you honestly, there are towns in Cornwall, which is not a wealthy county, apparently, that are serviced by Biffa and are immaculate. Honestly, I've photographed an operative actually cleaning litter bins, polishing them. There was not a speck of dirt or detritus or dog ends in sight. And if you walk down the borough in Farnham any day of the week, it's full of dog ends. Did you know that every cigarette end has about 10,000 microfibers in it of plastic, which go into our waterways through the gullies and into our waterways and are polluting, eventually making their way to the ocean. So we really have a duty to ensure that our contractor, Biffa, are doing the job properly. And frankly, they are simply not. And we're paying for it. we're not getting a discounted service.
Okay, I think we've got the point.
And I would like this to come up in future O&S meetings because we really need to work on this.
Okay, sounds like a good one to put into the quarterly measurements, but
Thank you.
Do you want to make a response now, Luke?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor, for your comments and questions. Happy to pick those observations up with the relevant Assistant Director. We're looking at alternative metrics. Keep Britain Tidy, who I'm sure you'll be familiar with, is a local campaign group for the cleanliness of high streets and all places besides, maintain a methodology to help local authorities compare and benchmark cleanliness of places. It's called the Local Environmental Quality Surveys, which we're having a look at as to whether we can roll out something similar by way of a cleanliness is an interesting thing to try and measure, but it's a well-used metric that most councils sign up to. So we're looking into that.
I would like to strongly support Councillor Hess's comments. I think they're very valid. I think it would be good to beef that up if we could. Okay, I think. Oh.
So really sorry to hear, Councillor, about the situation in Farnham. We are more we're managing the BIFA contract more effectively now. We have a new contract manager in place at the moment, so we are trying to hold BIFA to their contractual obligations a lot more, and we're having some success on that. So I do hope we'll see some improvements in that in the near future. And clearly, one of the things we want to do is when we go out to approach the end of the BIFA contract in a couple of years, and what our new arrangements are going to be is make sure we have a specification that captures what's required for each particular area.
Yes, briefly.
Very, very quickly. I think it's a cultural shift needed here because the quality of cleaning in Launceston, for example, was absolutely fantastic, really fantastic. The operatives that they have locally are really not up to the job, or they're not being supervised properly. You know, it's just not being done to a decent standard at all. So I think there's a real shift, a culture shift needed within BIFA. You know, I've banged on about glutton machines and so forth in the past, which I know that Guildford use. But actually, this man was using a barrow and a brush and a polishing cloth. He didn't have a glutton machine. He was working really well. I know that the Guildford director, the Guildford director, just to finish, the Guildford workforce are really well motivated people. And actually on Sunday I was in Guildford and they were out emptying bins on a Sunday in Guildford. So it can be done.
Thank you. I think you've made that point. I think we've got it received by the officers, and I think it's an important point. Okay. One final point from me. There is if we go to page 19 and we look at the last section there in terms of active and healthy life, there's no mention of the improvement of parks and open spaces. That's mentioned in the corporate plan, but isn't really well covered in the delivery plan. Could we add that in? Could we do something on that?
Thank you, Chair. You're very happy to pick that observation up with the relevant Assistant Director. I'm sure we can weave things in around like play parks refurbishment and stuff like that.
That would be very helpful. Thank you. Okay, I think that brings us to an end of that section. If we can now move on to page 20, this is decent and affordable homes, page 20 at 21. And I think going over the page to 22 and 23. Who wants to open up on this? Councillor Higgins.
Thank you, Chair. In Newhurst, we have a site on, it's considered Downhurst Road, but it's on the Ockley Road as well, which had council homes that were condemned due to subsidence. Over last year, that site has been demolished and is potentially ready for development. I've been working with an officer who has been keeping me updated about potential plans to build new social and affordable housing on that site. So I was hoping that something along the lines of potentially going for planning permission would have been in this section. It doesn't seem to appear there. I appreciate it may not be able to be answered tonight, but I was wondering whether that could be looked into, whether that should be added or reasons why it's not going to be.
That's a very specific. Do you want to comment on that, Julian?
Yeah, thanks, councillor. I'll pick that particular one up. I mean, it's covered generally in the top one of the delivery of the pipeline of new affordable council homes. Obviously details of that pipeline will at some point be coming to overview and scrutiny more generally, but we'll pick that up. If you want to give me details of that site, I'll pick it up.
Any other comments? Councillor Davidson.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure whether this should be underneath finance or underneath housing. Please direct me appropriately if I'm going astray. As part of the provision of new housing, we have a significant prospective project within Hazelmere, which has got a development over the next 2 years, continuing through this coming year, one hopes. I don't see that specifically within the plan. Do I need to be corrected?
Candice, do you want to speak to your microphone?
Yes, it is. I'm sorry, I haven't got page numbers, but in decent and affordable homes, it is in the 4th box down. It references e.g. Fairground Scheme at 69 High Street to deliver affordable homes.
What would be helpful would be if these specific big projects have dates. A plan should have a date and progress against that date, which we need to monitor.
I was going to raise that. I think a little more in the way of dates and objects of where we're going. Councillor Weldon.
No.
Oh, sorry, I've got your name down. Sorry, I'm getting told off. Councillor MacLeod, and I'll come to you afterwards. Councillor Weldon.
Thank you, Chairman. Back in October, one of the things I pointed out was that the corporate strategy seemed to have a total emphasis towards what we do as a council and council housing, looking after our tenants and, helping people who are homeless. And I totally and utterly commend Waverley for that, actually. They do their absolute best in that area. But there was very little in this strategy about market housing. And in fact, in response from the executive, they said they would try to introduce that sort of thing into the strategy. I don't think they have, to be honest. And that there's, again, under the delivery plan, there's very little about market housing. Now, again, I totally understand why, actually, because I'm extremely disappointed in the attitude of the Labour government towards housing development. And I thought that they would have a different approach towards developers. The Conservative government seemed to me to have too cosy a relationship with developers. But the Labour government is continuing to blame NIMBYs and local councils for not delivering housing, which is ridiculous. And that's, I'm not sure how we deal with that as Waverley, actually, but we can't ignore it because we're going to continue to be blamed. We're going to continue to be told we don't have a 5-year housing supply, therefore we're going to keep having to grant more planning permissions that won't actually be built, or at least the majority of them won't be built, because the developers continue to develop housing at the rate that suits them from maximum profitability. And I know the leader agrees with me on this, and I've heard him speak passionately about it several times. And maybe we can't do anything about it, but I just thought I'd point it out that we're sort of ignoring the problem a bit in the strategy, maybe because we can't do much about it, actually.
Well, this section mainly deals with our own homes. It doesn't really deal with the development of the plan. Is that something which we ought to put right within this delivery plan? Or we ought to have a specific section? Paul?
I think my thoughts on that would be that we probably need a section on engagement with government on housing, whether that be about lobbying for how much social housing is built and where, about the types and styles and so on of market housing. There is an element of our we have some tactical interventions with market housing, I would call it, because we're talking about single units on occasion. But I think there's probably a section that could look at it from that perspective, but I agree our ability to move the dial on this is likely to be quite limited or zero, unfortunately.
Oh, well, that's exactly right. But I would have thought we ought to have some comment about the overall plan that's being developed for housing rather than just our own council houses. There ought to be there and engagement with the government and delivering better. It's a big, tall order for the dying days of Waverley Borough Council, but I think probably we ought to have something in there which says that.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thank you for the comments. Very happy to pick those up with the relevant teams and to weave them in. From the latest data that I think we can weave this into narrative too, is that Waverley is one of the most, in terms of affordability, one of the least affordable in Surrey, alongside other rural parts of Guildford as well. So the pressures here are particularly pressing. So we'll pick that up. Thank you.
And of course, if we adopt all the housing targets that are being thrust upon us, we will double the population every 30 years, as far as I can see. But we won't go there now. Councillor Weldon.
Thank you. My question also refers to the fairground site, which is very controversial in the town, and there's a lot of unhappiness on different aspects of it. I think we really need now a members' update, a members' briefing on where we are and the progress that has been made. Thank you.
Candice, you were nodding your head.
Yes, so O&S Resources, we will be bringing a informal briefing on a number of sites, and we can definitely make sure that Fairground is included in that.
Ezra, you wanted to make a point?
I was just going to thank you for your question, Councillor. And in addition to what Candice said, happy to organise additional briefings. That'd be helpful for ward councillors and or anybody else who'd like to have an update. And town council, yeah, whoever, yeah, very can shape that with you. Thank you.
Mrs. Keane.
Yes, while we're talking about housing numbers and the fact that we're going to be absolutely overloaded with this government's insistence on the amount of housing we actually provide, is it not a good idea that we should maybe be talking about an infrastructure system? Because frankly, we won't have enough doctor surgeries, we won't have enough schools, we won't have enough of anything to provide for all these extra people that we're having into our areas. And it is very, very worrying because we're already strapped for doctors and dentists now.
Claire, would you like to comment on that before I go to the leader?
Yeah, so I think that all feeds into the local plan review, which is obviously a project that is spanned over 3 years rather than 1 year. So happy to sort of work with Luke and Jenny around how we address the overall issue of housing and the particular acute issue we have with RPs not taking up housing that's already has permission because of the way the Homes England grant works and lobbying government and so forth.
That must include infrastructure, but I think the overall plan is something which should be in this delivery plan, and we should make reference to the government on this. And
okay, so
infrastructure is clearly a big part.
It's a fundamental part because we won't deliver the homes without the infrastructure. So I'll work with Luke and Jenny to get something in this document.
Thank you. I think that deals with that. Can I just make one other comment? It really relates to homes and going back to the sustainability agenda. We all know that the 4 or 5 or 1,000 homes that we have are simply not going to be brought up to spec by 2030. We've done 7 homes at the cost of £250,000 or £300,000 a house to bring them up to cap 1. I know that in the budget we talked of 339 homes taking advantage of a government grant to bring them up to cap 3. That leaves about 4,740 to go. The overall sustainability thing in the first section excludes council or social homes. What are we doing as far as that is concerned? We keep saying, well, it's up to the government, but is it, and what are we doing? Paul?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we're doing a number of things. When we're building new houses, we're building the sustainability features directly into them because that's by far and away the most efficient way to do that. So for new properties,
to cap 3 or to cap 1?
I think in fairness, they're all to EPC A standard properties, which I think is whichever one is the highest, 3 or 1. I forget which one it is, but EPC A and higher makes that in that the top end of that. What we're also looking at for one of the main reasons we did the pilot that we did was to ascertain what elements basically give the best bang for your buck. Where we will likely be putting a lot of our effort in is to the fabric first approach and making sure that we can do the relatively low cost but high impact additions, such as things like rendering to the front of buildings, adjustment to insulation, roof spaces and so on, to try and improve the profile of our extant houses as far as we can. What we are very good at doing as this authority, though, is bidding for money from the government and other areas, and that does allow us to do more more widespread changes. Basically, we need, I think, something like £180 million to do all of this completely, properly, and to the standard we'd like to do. We're obviously not going to be able to do that. So it's getting as much as we can for the money that we have.
I just think that within the delivery plan, something along those lines in the delivery plan might be helpful, either in the decent and affordable homes section or in the climate change section. I don't mind which.
Yeah, we'll add something to that effect, Chair. Just to point out, the government's target for 2030 is to bring all of our homes up to EPCC standard, rather than A. So
All I can say is we've got a long, long way to go.
Well, not necessarily. The majority of our homes already are EPCC standard. So yes, there are.
Why are we spending all this money on 339 homes?
Because those are some of the properties that aren't. But which is certainly not the case that most of our homes aren't. The majority of our homes do meet that standard. However, we're modelling now how we get the remaining properties to that 2030 target, and clearly the money we're getting in through the Warm Homes grant that we're match funding is doing hundreds of properties at a time. Then the next step clearly is, once we get to EPCC, the next step is then the transition to net zero over a longer period of time.
Okay, I just think that an addition of that into this plan would be helpful. Okay. I think that closes that section. Can we move then on to page 24 and the brilliantly entitled A Resilient and Well-Managed Council? Who wants to lead off on this? Councillor Rabini, we haven't heard much from you yet.
Oh, sorry. Yes. Okay. Two questions. First of all, the first one. Process of transfer of assets that meet the criteria of the Council's committee asset transfer policy. I'm all for this, and Hazelmere are trying to get some across. My problem is the timeline, that it seems to take, I mean, one property has taken over 4 years. We obviously haven't got that time left. Is there any way that we can speed this process up and keep a track of all the assets that we want to transfer across to the different councils, or indeed the charities? I mean, the Edge, for example, is an example of Surrey saying they would transfer it under an asset. We have an agreement with the Edge, and yet we've still not taken it on. So I'd like to see if we can do a bit more exploration in this one.
I think we covered that earlier on in terms of the effort to what we're going to give to or devolve to towns and parishes. And the assets Paul mentioned is a key part of that. So Paul, do you want, there is already an asset register, I think, which is in mind, isn't there?
Yeah, so what I'm actually planning to do with this, and this is something that I'll be discussing with the exec actually on Friday, one of the things I've noticed in this process is we've got quite a lot of siloed working in terms of how we deal with those assets and get them meeting the business plans that the town councils have put in. I'm going to be forming a temporary little working group of representatives of the different departments' officers so that we can start breaking through some of the delays on the asset transfers, because we're obviously going to be doing a lot more of them than we thought we would have been doing under the standard policy prior to LGR. So that is something that is going to be more information on that probably from next week.
Okay, thank you. So you want to come back?
No, I've got a second question, if that's all right.
Right, go ahead.
The second one is about car parking, and it talks about technology monitor usage to inform decisions to drive footfall to our car parks and town centres. Unfortunately, car parks at Hazelmere, for example, are pretty full for at least 3 or 4 days a week. Most of the town centre car parks are actually full, and it's very difficult to find parking spaces, particularly on a Thursday, Friday or Saturday. So I'm not quite sure how we're going to get that information without building new car parks or spaces for actual people to park in.
Luke, good one for you.
Thank you, Chair. I tried to avoid talking about planning and car parking, so I think I've broke both rules this evening. But what the service are looking to do here, so there are a few ways that we can support. So parking is integral to town centre activity. It draws people in, and often, depending on where the car park is situated, you might want to encourage certain activity. So, for instance, in the town centre, we're quite, I imagine, an objective is to encourage turnover, so people come in for it. So in short space time, come in, do what they need to do, and then leave. And longer term parking should be perhaps part of a wider strategy for how we want to draw people in and when. The technology that the service are looking to roll out also will improve payment technology as well. So some people like paying on their mobile phone, others like paying with coins and cash, others quite happy to use their debit cards at the machine. So there's those sorts of process efficiencies. What's particularly helpful if you have it on your phone is that for those that use it is that, you know, if you're staying slightly longer than you anticipate, you can just add another hour or so, and that's fine, as opposed to having to rush back for the meter. So there's something to smooth the usage for people, but also to encourage the behaviours that we would like to see in car parks in terms of churn. In terms of building new ones, that's not something I have any information on, I'm afraid, but very happy to talk to Kelvin as the AD to find out what's happening in that space. Thank you.
Can I just come back quickly on,
yes.
you talk about short term. My problem is that the shopkeepers don't want short term in many respects, because they want customers to come in and not just go to one shop and then leave. They actually want people to stay a little longer and spend time in the town at other shops. So are you working with the shopkeepers themselves?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your follow-up question. Yeah, you're quite right. The parking solutions need to be locally tailored. I don't have the information as to what the service is doing, but I'm very happy to pick that up by way of a written response to find out.
I think it might be helpful to have the bids involved as well. Kimberly.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry to butt in here, but I clerk the car parking executive working group that's led by Councillor Fairclough, and they are looking at, they've just tendered for, or they are currently tendering for new car parking machines, which will provide a better service in regards of getting information about what usage in each of the car parks, how long people stay, etc. They also are looking at various incentives in different car parks to encourage either short stay, long stay, coming later, dependent on the need of that area. You can get hold of, if you go onto the private papers, you should be able to be able to see the papers from the car parking executive working group, which will also give you a lot of information on current usage and things like that as well. If you can't get it, let me know. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go to Councillor Barker-Lomax, then Councillor Davidson, and I think we have Jerry Hyman on the line who also wants to ask a question. I'll bring him in at that point. So, Councillor Barker-Lomax.
Thank you. In the light of LGR, I think we as a committee should make a recommendation to the executive that our plan includes a merger readiness review of all capital and long-term projects, prioritising legal and contractual commitments and cross-authority alignment, and that we stage gate any projects launching after Q3 25, pending final decisions on Surrey unitary structure. If we refocus in this way, we will protect the public purse.
I get the sentiment of that. I'm sure the leader will want to say something.
So there's a certain element of not knowing who we're going to be merging with. You'll appreciate my enjoyment of being asked by one of the Conservative members to conduct a merger review after the last few years, but that aside, I understand where you're coming from with this. My understanding is there's something, I think it's called a Section 24 or something like that, notice that will apply at some point within the LGR process that will restrict our ability to divest assets over a certain value, engage in new contracts over a certain value, etc. So there will be elements of what we're intending to do that will be pretty much as you've described, even if we don't call it that, will be something similar. But there are certain elements of this regulation that will force us to do some of this in this way anyway. And I think that will kick in some point in the middle of next year. I think it's something like that. So I'm just looking at Luke to see if that's what we're roughly thinking. It's next year that Section 24 duty would be in. Shadow authority. So once you've got the unitary shadow authority in place, that duty would, because I think the best value duty shifts to the new unitary rather than the existing boroughs and districts at that point, and the same will apply to the county.
I think, Councillor Barker-Lomax, this is a really difficult area. I agree entirely that this section in particular has to be linked to LGR. But since we don't know what the LGR structure is going to be yet, it's difficult to link it because we don't know what we're linking it with. That's why I think towards the end of this year, certainly by October, when we will know where we're going, I think that at that point, we maybe get it back into a resources committee meeting to review that at that time, and then we can safeguard that in that way, would be my preferred step forward. It's difficult to put it into a delivery plan. other than to refer to it at this point. Do you want to come back?
Yes, so Councillor Follows is saying we'll know by the middle of next year, or I wasn't quite sure specifically what.
We will know with the structure, we will know whether we're going into 2 unitaries or 3 unitaries later this year. That will be around about the end of the summer. And then by next year, we'll have an election to a new council, which will be the new unitary. And at that point, we will be able to have a clearer idea of where we're going. Paul?
Yeah, so one of my colleagues, leaders, met with the ministry today. So as far as we understand it, we will get some initial feedback on the LGR proposals at some point before the end of next month. They've not clarified as to whether that will tell us what the outcomes will be, just what the feedback is. So otherwise, we're still going on what we've been told, which is that we will find out in September what the outcome is. So obviously that might therefore be the end of September. We've also been told today, I think I mentioned this in a couple of other meetings, that there will be some sort of government-led consultation. But once again, we've had almost no clarity as to what that actually involves or when, only more confirmation that there will be some. And that was a result of, a meeting with MHCLG and some of the Surrey leaders today.
Can I recommend that within this delivery plan, we do put some recognition of LGR so that it is the elephant in the room. And if we just miss it out entirely, we've missed out a rather important point, even though we don't know that. Final point.
Sorry, very quickly, please. Section 7.2 of, Section 7 of every report going forward will include an LGR assessment for literally every item that goes through this council. The new report template is likely to be approved on Friday and will be mandatory for all reports by August the 1st.
Councillor Barker-Lomax.
Well, I mean, that sounds exactly what I wanted to hear.
Right.
So good news.
Thank you. It's I've got Councillor Davidson and then Councillor MacLeod, and then I will bring in Jerry Hyman.
Thank you, Chairman. Descending from the high heights of LGR back down to car parking. I'm glad to hear from Luke that multiple means of payment will be supported. I think Kimberly's confirmed that from the committees. The issue which I've got, or not really the issue, the request I've got is, could we have some numbers? Are we going to complete all the car parks by the end of March 26, or only half, or what's the plan?
Luke, favorite subject?
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor, for your question. So I'm very happy to go away and get detail in terms of specific milestones for full rollout. But as we understand it, the technology will be rolled out to all car parks that the council looks after by the end of the financial year.
I think that would be an interesting thing to build into this plan, into the delivery plan. Okay, Councillor MacLeod.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm a bit of a numbers person, so just for interest, I added up the number of things that we're planning to do across the whole delivery plan, and it's 91 things that we're planning to do, which is very ambitious, and I'm not criticising it at all. It's good we tackle that. But I also noticed that there seemed to be a fair disparity in the number of items allocated to different portfolio holders, and I accept the leader's point that all the items are not going to be the same in terms of difficulty and size, etc., and some of them are grouped and so on. But it does show that Councillor Fairgraph has 12 mentions, and going down, the leader himself has only got 4. He's at the bottom. But to be fair to the leader, well, he's responsible for everything, right. Actually. But there's a point I want you to come to, and it's not just to be funny. I did notice that there's actually no mentions at all of Councillor Gemma Long, who's the portfolio holder for customer services and IT. Now, Gemma's somebody who I've got a very high regard for. She sits in the Standards Committee that I chair. She's also a member of the Joint Constitutional Review Group, which I chair jointly with a Guildford person. But I just thought it was curious that there was no mention, because her portfolio is customer services and IT, And having worked in IT, I know that IT can be sometimes overlooked. And I think IT should be part of our delivery plan and part of our corporate strategy, particularly, in fact, in terms of the fact that we're being told that productivity in this country, particularly in the public sector, is not good enough, particularly after COVID. We haven't apparently got rid of all the people that we took on to do COVID. I don't know if that applies in Waverley, but it applies across the board. And the way to deal with this is going to be to start to use IT more effectively, particularly AI services and things like that. And I think as a council, we should have a strategy towards that. If we don't, we'll be left behind. So I think we should have an IT and AI strategy. So I'm just surprised there's no mention at all of particularly IT, but customer services in the delivery plan.
Luke, do you want to go first on that?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thank you, Councillor, for your observations and your question there. Yeah, you're quite right. ICT is integral to all council activities, and it underpins everything. Our intention with this document was to make it something that that residents kind of engage with as kind of tangible things that the council will do that affect their lives and their communities and their towns and villages. Eyes tend to glaze over when we, well, not for me certainly, but when we talk about IT and AI and stuff and other such initiatives. But very happy we can pick up with the Assistant Director if there's anything in particular. I do know that there's quite a bit of work going on across Guildford and Waverley around work with the LGA undertaking like a digital 360 and things like that to improve our ICT offering and the customer offer too. So happy to pick that up as an observation with the AD.
Okay, thank you. Can I then now bring Jerry Hyman in? Is Jerry on the line? Jerry, are you there?
Yes, I am. And,
would you like to ask your question?
Yes, I did actually have a list of 20 odd issues going through, but fortunately a number of members have covered quite a few of them, and you yourself have touched on some of the more important ones. Particularly the need for us to meet statutory requirements, and there's no mention in here of those needs. Or whether perhaps they go without saying. I understand from what your response or the response given to Councillor Murray's question earlier regarding Councillor Fairclough's responsibilities, it appears in particular that areas which I've concentrated on over a number of years, the habitats and air quality, are now Councillor Fairclough's responsibility, I understand. So I should perhaps take those up with him. I don't intend to go through all the other things I've got here. Members wouldn't thank me for that now. There are other ways of doing it. It's going to come to the executive. But I have a concern, as I think you've said in the nicest possible way. You've said this is not a plan. It's a delivery plan, which isn't a delivery plan because you have to be planning to deliver, and that means you've got to quantify and have target dates for what you're going to have done by when. And that way we can judge whether we have succeeded or whether we have failed, and staff know whether or not they've got to speed up or in order to deliver on time. And we should be able to be bringing forward constantly. There should be some sort of record of how far we are along each of them. And these things, of course, in the detail we've got here, aren't covered in our KPIs. These are specific items that aren't on the government's mandatory list, and we're not about to bring in a key KPI for every single thing that's in this list here. You could clarify in there just a little. What I found irksome was that it mentions the Bourne site, which is Bourne Mill site. So put the word mill in for me, please, if you wouldn't mind, so that people in Farnham know, or people know that we're talking about the Bourne Mill Recycling Centre site that we've got, rather than something that might be in the Bourne. There's no mention in here of grounds maintenance, and I'm surprised. There's also mention of a couple of things which could be possibly contentious, but we don't really know because there's not insufficient detail. They're things which we're planning on talking about in September, it seems, which is LEZs. that could be extremely contentious, and stock transfer as well, also in the housing issue. So I think perhaps we should have some further detail in here. If we're going to mention things which could be highly contentious, we should have a little bit more detail, or not bother mentioning them until we've had some sort of discussion on them, because all of those I'd expect to have to come back to the O&S committees in time. And quite frankly, a lot of this I don't think we'll get done in the space of 2 years. That's all I'll say for now, because I really don't want to get into the details of all the things and expect officer responses to them right now. And if I did, then members would probably want to go into further detail again, and you'd be here past 9 o'clock. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak, because I didn't indicate prior to the 12 noon deadline. I didn't realise there was a deadline, but it's very kind of you to allow me to come in. But if we can just please make it, if we can go a lot stronger on this and put in a lot more detail, so that we've got quantities and we've got target dates for everything that we're doing, so that we can say that is the plan.
Okay, thank you, Jerry. Thank you very much. Luke or anybody else want to make a comment?
Thank you.
Against you, have you got a similar point, or to continue on from that, or? Oh, go to a new point. Okay, so Luke, do you want to respond to Councillor Hyman?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Hyman, for your points. Yes, when it comes to reporting on progress, we will certainly use metrics, benchmarking dates and key milestones where at all possible. What we've been trying to get across here is the key outcomes that we want to affect. Now we need to go away and deliver, and we will be merging this as part of the council's quarterly performance reporting. We're thinking biannual updates to the committees, O&S, within the respective remit of those committees. So thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just quickly, page 26, the penultimate point where it says engage with staff through staff surveys, the measurement box is blank. I'm assuming the aim is to reduce staff turnover, but if some sort of measurement could be put in there, that'd be great.
Sorry, Luke.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Higgins, for your question. Yes, you're quite right. We've been having discussions. I think we may have missed this off. So we've been having discussions around the best metrics to use in order to demonstrate progress here and the good work that's going on. So turnover is one, as is sickness, absence too. That can also be an indicator. But members may be familiar with there's an established methodology, something called the Net Promoter Score. You might be aware of. In effect, it's like an aggregate measure. When we ask staff how they feel about working at Waverley, it's an aggregate. In effect, it's the extent to which a member of staff would actively promote the council as a place to work to their friends, colleagues. That's a particularly good one, and we'll pick that up with colleagues in HR, because the benefit that we have there is that it's also benchmarkable against other comparable authorities and indeed, private sector organisations too. So we will pick that up. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think that draws things to a conclusion. Is there anybody else who wants to make any other point? Councillor Hess.
Sorry. Where it says on page 26, the council is accountable to its residents, ensuring they are informed, engaged, able to influence council decisions. And I've read the other columns about the publication of the annual delivery plan, review of council monitoring, engagement with residents is improved. I'm just interested practically, in a day-to-day sense, how this communication with residents is happening. I don't quite understand that. Perhaps that could be clarified. Thank you.
I think a very reasonable point. Luke.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor, for your question. Yes, you're quite right. It could be clarified. Comms can often be a difficult thing to measure in terms of how effective it is. The local government association they maintain a method for undertaking resident surveys that can be used to supplement a survey that takes place. I think it's called, if you search on Google, it's "Are You Being Served?" And some key metrics include things like feeling informed and able to influence decision making. That can be attending a council meeting and partaking, or indeed commenting on something. It can be taking part in a consultation, or indeed the council might run specific engagement events like we did with the corporate strategy last year. So I think we can be clearer in this document, like what we've got planned around resident engagements. Very happy to pick that up with Ian, our comms manager. One thing that I'm particularly keen we look at too is a resident survey. Benefit we have with working with in collaboration with Guildford is that we have quite a large scale there where we can drive quite a good bargain with market research companies that run these things on our behalf. They're very happy to get some additional detail for you there and pick that up. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, ladies and gentlemen, with that, I'm going to conclude the meeting. We just have to now ensure that we've got the right recommendation, which will go into both committees. The recommendation on page 5, at least on the report that I'm looking at, says the Overview and Scrutiny Committee resolved to consider the draft corporate development plan set out in Appendix 1 of this report and make any comments and recommendations on its contents to the executive. So if I may suggest, Chris, that we should take that. We've considered the draft delivery plan and we list the following observations and comments for the executive to consider. Would that, and then we would list the points that we've made. Are members happy? I may change that slightly. Carol, are you happy with that? Yeah. We'll play around, but that will be the gist of what we will say. Does that sound a reasonable approach? Anybody disagreeing with that? So can we all resolve that that's okay? Great. Fine. I think everybody's agreed. I think, therefore, on behalf of both Carol Coburn and myself, I will close this meeting. Thank you very much indeed, and thank you to officers for their time. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman.